The beginning of the French Revolution. The French Revolution was an epoch-making event in the 18th century. France was among the intellectually and economically advanced countries of Europe in the 18th century. During the reign of Bourbon monarch Louis XIV, France was at the height of her glory. The French capital, Paris, had become the cultural center of Europe. French thinkers and their philosophy profoundly influenced Europe. Within 75 years of Louis XIV's death, however, France lost its glory. The year 1789 witnessed a great upheaval in France. The masses revolted against the French monarchy and brought about its downfall. This political upheaval is known as the French Revolution. The French Revolution is not only a great event in the history of Europe, but the most significant event in the history of human civilization. France on the eve of revolution. The French Revolution is regarded as the starting point of the history of the modern world. During the period between the death of Louis XIV and 1789, there was enormous growth in the population, trade, and territorial boundaries of France. In spite of the affluence, France was dominated by several social inequalities. The French Revolution was outwardly a revolt against monarchy, but the aim of bringing about social equality was the underlying inspiration. Along with the unsatisfactory political state of France, the social, economical, and intellectual factors were also very important causes of the French Revolution. We have to consider these fundamental causes of the French Revolution. Let's first understand their social structure. The French Revolution was a struggle for social equality. France was divided into three classes: the first estate, the second estate, and the third estate. The first estate consisted of the clergy. It was again subdivided into higher and lower clergies. The higher clergy was a very prosperous class. They were holders of land. They received a tax named tithe from the laymen. The clergy enjoyed several privileges and political and economic concessions. They paid little or no tax at all. They were not interested in mediation and religious awareness. They intervened in politics. The higher priests had become pleasure-loving, but the condition of the lower clergy was no better than that of the peasants. The second estate, or the second privileged class, was that of the nobles. They were in possession of large parts of land. The nobles were entitled to enjoy political and economic privileges and concessions. They were free from taxes and were benefited by political, military, and judicial posts on a hereditary basis. The nobles were governed by a set of laws separate from those meant for the members of the third estate. Luxury and pleasure was the main feature of their life. The third estate consisted of the common people. This group was subdivided into three classes: the upper middle class, comprising of laborers; the middle class, which included teachers, lawyers, doctors, writers, artists, government employees, merchants, etc. This class was well educated and their financial condition was good. In spite of good financial conditions and quality, this class was deprived of prestige and higher posts in administration. This class raised its voice against the monarchy to get prestige and their rights. The third estate also included a large number of farmers and serfs. Their condition was miserable and they had to work as bonded laborers. Moreover, they had to pay heavy taxes. The lower middle class of peasants was considered as an inferior class in the third estate. The burden of taxation rested most heavily on them. They were deprived of many privileges. The common people of the third estate were compelled to pay 1/10 of their income as tithe tax to the clergy, crown tax to the king, tally tax on property, wage-am tax or income tax, and so on. The clergy was engaged in religious work. The nobles were at the war front, and the common people paid the taxes. That was the social structure of 18th century France. The tax system in France. Extreme disparity was the speciality of the then French society. The clergy and the nobles were exempted from most taxes in spite of having higher incomes. On the other hand, the poverty-stricken common people had to pay more than half of their income in the form of taxes. The common people were exploited under the tax system. They had to pay various taxes like tithe, salt tax and tally. Apart from this, they had to take special care of the king, clergy and nobles for their favors. Carlyle, the historian, described the life of the common people by saying that 9/10 of the French population died of hunger and 1/10 of indigestion. Now that we have seen the tax system of early France, let us move on to the judicial system. Judicial system of France. The judicial system was also based on inequality. The codes of law differed from province to province. The principle of jurisprudence also differed from one social class to another. The judicial spheres were not confirmed. There were more than 360 legislative statutes at that time. A chaotic situation was prevalent in the judicial field. This resulted in resentment among the common people. Voltaire had rightly said about the judicial system of France that the people of France had to alter the laws as he changes horses in his journey from one end to another in France. The discontent of the masses finally expressed itself in the form of a powerful revolt in the year 1789. The French Revolution was engineered by the members of the Third Estate. The Third Estate was not a homogeneous group. It comprised of merchants, lawyers, doctors, teachers, craftsmen, government employees, farmers and serfs. These were the people who were the real architects of France's prosperity. They were responsible for the intellectual and cultural glory of France. The food production of the country depended greatly on them. In spite of this, they were compelled to pay taxes, which led to their miserable condition. French thinkers, especially Montesquieu, Voltaire and Rousseau, awakened the masses against this social injustice. Let's understand the views of these great thinkers one by one. Montesquieu. Montesquieu was born to a family of nobles. He was a lawyer by profession. After the comparative study of British and French judiciary, he wrote The Spirit of the Laws. According to him, legislative, executive and judicial powers should be separate. This separation of powers would guarantee freedom, equality and protection of life and property. Montesquieu protested against absolute monarchy. He was deeply influenced by the British administrative system, as it was a fine synthesis of excellence of monarchy, democracy and feudalism. He emphasized the need for changing the absolute and faulty monarchy. His ideas deeply influenced the intelligentsia of France. America accepted his theory of separation of powers. Voltaire. Voltaire was a well-known writer and philosopher of the 18th century. He was known for his satirical writings, and his philosophy influenced the people. He wrote the famous book entitled Candide. Voltaire was not the proponent of democracy, but he was a very staunch proponent of individual liberty. He also supported monarchy and once said that the rule of one lion is even better than 100 rats. Voltaire criticized the French monarchy, the selfish clergy and the nobles through his plays, poems, history and biography. Therefore, he was exiled from France. Voltaire's thoughts motivated the people to revolt against injustice and tyranny. Rousseau. Rousseau is regarded as a pioneer of the French Revolution. His books Social Contract and Emile became immensely popular. Through his writings, Rousseau expressed his political thoughts. He said that man is born free, but later he finds himself in all kinds of bondage. He further said that as man moves away from the state of nature, he is subjected to more and more restrictions. For a stable social life, some restrictions are essential. Society willingly accepts them. With a view to ensure self-discipline in this regard, society creates a political state. Thus, the state is not a divine creation, but it is the outcome of a sort of unwritten social contract. By implication, it means that if the state failed to abide by the terms of the contract, the people have a natural and moral right to overthrow the state authority. Rousseau proclaimed the three popular principles of democracy: liberty, equality, and fraternity. Napoleon Bonaparte had rightly remarked, without Rousseau, the French Revolution would not have taken place. This explains how the philosophy of Rousseau motivated the French revolutionaries. Efforts to improve the conditions. Louis XVI was crowned as the French monarch in 1774. He was a man of character and was also very kind to the people. Although he was a well-wisher of his people, he was incapable of action. He did his best to bring France out of the financial mess with the help of his finance ministers, Turgot, Necker, and Calonne. They opined that unless the nobles paid taxes, it would be impossible to increase the revenue of France. The king convened a meeting and proposed the taxation policy. The nobles, however, were adamant and refused to accept the levy of taxes and any curtailment in their privileges. Finally, Louis XVI was thus compelled to convene the Estates General, a representative body of all the three classes in France. The Estates General was summoned after a lapse of nearly 175 years. The Estates General and the Tennis Court Oath. The members of the Third Estate suggested that the representatives of all the three estates should sit and vote together in view of the serious financial crisis. The representatives of the first two estates opposed the suggestion as they thought that it would lower their social and political prestige. The king sided with the first two estates and turned down the proposal for a joint session. The representatives of the third estate left the parliament. The hall was subsequently cordoned off by the royal army. The enraged representatives of the third estate assembled on the tennis court near the royal palace and claimed that they alone were the true representatives of the people. They declared themselves as the National Assembly and took a solemn oath to remain united until the people's sovereignty was established. This was the beginning of an open confrontation between feudalistic power and the common people in France. The king sent orders to leave the hall. Mirabeau, their leader, gave a befitting reply. Nothing beyond it could disperse them, as they were there by the will of the people. Upon this, the king did not take any action against the commoners. This was a landmark success in the history of the Third Estate. Meanwhile, some of the representatives from the higher class joined the lower class. The air of revolution reached the army too. The king had no assurance of the loyalty of his followers. Finally, King Louis XVI gave his consent for the combined National Assembly. The people took it as their first triumph over the monarchy. These events took place at Versailles. The Fall of Bastile. The new assembly, under the command of Lafayette, raised civil guards to protect themselves. The National Assembly made many improvements. The king secretly attempted to destroy the National Assembly. The rumors of the arrest of the leaders of the National Assembly spread in Paris. This made the mob furious and they became rebellious. The mob made a desperate resolve to attack the fort of Bastille. Accordingly, the people attacked Bastille on the 14th of July and captured the bulk of ammunition and freed all the prisoners. Bastille was a symbol of absolute monarchy, social inequality, and injustice. The fall of Bastille became a symbol of liberty. This was the first violent incident in the course of the French Revolution. Therefore, the 14th of July is celebrated as National Day in France. Work of the National Assembly. After the fall of Bastille, the discontent about the clergy and the nobles increased among the common people. As a result, the clergy and the nobles abjured their traditional privileges on the 4th of August, 1789. The National Assembly abolished bonded labor and cancelled the taxes which were paid to the clergy and the nobles. It annulled age-old feudalism. Therefore, the 4th of August became the Social Revolution Day of France. Declaration of Human Rights. On the 12th of August, 1789, the National Assembly declared the Manifesto of the Rights of Man. It was greatly inspired by the Declaration of American Independence and the philosophy of Rousseau. The people were assured of liberty, equality and fraternity. The principles like protection of fundamental rights, freedom of speech, personal property, resistance to oppression, and control of masses on economic sovereignty were accepted unanimously. This manifesto is regarded as the death certificate of an old age. There are many infamous personalities in the French Revolution, and one such personality was Marie Antoinette. Let us see what she was so infamous for. Marie Antoinette. Maria Antoinette, the Princess of Austria, was responsible for Louis XVI's unsatisfactory administration. She spent huge amounts of money in purchasing luxurious articles. Maria Antoinette emptied the French treasury. So, she gained the nickname of Madame Deficit. When people marched to the Palace of Versailles demanding bread, Maria Antoinette very rudely said, "Eat cake if you don't get bread, or else eat butter if not cake." The March of Women. King Louis XVI attempted to pressurize the French Revolution. The King's Act made the people furious. Thousands of women marched to the Palace of Versailles on the 5th of October, 1789. Some men in disguise also joined the procession. The furious mob imprisoned the king, the queen and their son and brought them to Paris and kept them under house arrest. This event is known as the funeral procession of the Bourbon monarchy. The people said that we have caught the baker, his wife and his son. Now we can get enough bread. The Constitution of France. King Louis XVI pleaded for assistance from some of the European kings. The king, queen and their prince were caught by the masses when they were trying to run away in disguise to another country. The king and his family were kept in refinement. France was declared as a republic state on the 22nd of September 1792. The king was beheaded on the guillotine on the 21st of January 1793. The most freshest reign of terror started in France after that incident. The Reign of Terror. The Reign of Terror continued for about 1.5 years, from 1793 to 1795. The first year was marked by terrorism of the extremist leaders such as Robespierre. Thousands of innocent sympathizers of the revolution were beheaded by Robespierre merely on suspicion. People were finally weary of this bloodshed and put Robespierre to death under the guillotine on the 28th of July, 1794. The leadership of the revolution gradually slipped into the hands of the military. Napoleon Bonaparte, an intelligent, efficient and an ambitious general, shortly crowned himself as the emperor, bringing the French Republic to an end on the 18th of May 1804. When there was a revolution, there is bound to be some ripple effect. The French Revolution too had its share of effects. Let's have a look at them. Effects of the French Revolution. The French Revolution overthrew the absolute monarchy in France. Feudalism disappeared forever. The principles of republicanism took deep roots in France and ushered in a new age of equality. France attained a new vigor as a result of the principles of nationalism. After the Revolution, there was an overall transformation not only in the political field but also in the social life of France. Post the French Revolution, there was economic stability, industrial growth, national integration, social equality, religious tolerance, improved status, public education system, etc. The rise of Napoleon Bonaparte in French politics was considered as a significant incident of the French Revolution. He was regarded as an offspring of the Revolution. The French Revolution had affected world politics as well. Ancient feudalism was uprooted from Europe. The people understood that absolute monarchy is illegitimate and it can be uprooted. This philosophy made many countries pro-democratic. The principle of sovereignty became the important principle of modern social life. The Revolution had given the value structure of liberty, equality, fraternity, constitutionalism, and democracy. The French Revolution had also inspired many nations towards their own independence and many societies for liberation from servility. The revolutionary message of social equality motivated humanism and socialism in the future. The French Revolution started the age of nationalism. This revolution had radically changed the world's psyche and hence it was considered as an epoch.